The first time anyone heard the file, it was by accident. A late-night college student, half asleep in a dim dorm room, clicked on a mislabeled link buried in an online psychology forum. The title had been ordinary enough, something about archival sound analysis. But when the file began to play, the student jolted upright, the glow of the laptop screen turning his face pale. The audio wasn't music, wasn't even words at first. It was breathing. Heavy, uneven, ragged breathing, like someone was forcing air through a broken chest. Then came the crying. A woman's voice, raw and unrestrained, echoing in the digital static. No one ever figured out who she was. Her sobs didn't sound staged, didn't sound like acting. They were desperate, low, filled with something that made even hardened internet veterans click pause. But curiosity is poison. Almost everyone who stopped listening would press play again within minutes. The sound pulled them back as if the recording itself demanded to be heard. By the end of the night, the audio had been reposted across hidden corners of the web. People argued in chat rooms about whether it was real or fake. A psychology student from Chicago wrote that it reminded him of trauma therapy sessions, where survivors relive horrors they can't put into words. Another listener swore it was nothing more than a creepypasta project, some underground art experiment meant to provoke. But no one agreed. The file spread because of what came next. After the sobbing faded, a man's voice appeared, low, calm, chilling in its clarity. He never shouted. He never raised his tone. But every word he spoke dripped with authority, as if he was speaking directly into the listener's brain. "You will not turn this off," he said, almost whispering. "You'll listen. You'll finish, because that's what you are now, just an ear. Just an ear waiting to obey." Most people claimed they stopped there. Yet private messages on those forums told another story. Listeners admitted that they couldn't move, that their fingers hovered over the trackpad but never clicked away. Something about the voice was paralyzing, and though it never issued direct threats, it felt like one wrong move could bring something terrible crashing into reality. By the time the clip ended 23 minutes later, many listeners felt sick. Some reported headaches, ringing in their ears, or a strange hollow feeling in their stomachs. One even wrote that he felt like his childhood memories were being rearranged, as though the voice had planted something inside him. The internet called it the most disturbing audio ever uploaded. What nobody expected was that the file would become a subject of psychological research. Professors at several universities downloaded it under the guise of studying auditory suggestion. A small group of graduate students in California became obsessed with cataloging the responses of listeners. And as the data came in, one conclusion became unavoidable. This wasn't just shock value. It was doing something to people's minds. Some reported dreams after listening, lucid, graphic dreams where they wandered into endless hallways filled with whispers. Others began hearing faint static in real life, even when no device was playing. For a few, the woman's crying would echo faintly in the background of their day, as though her grief had followed them into waking life. The psychology community divided itself in two. One side argued it was a modern myth, an urban legend dressed up with clever editing. The other side whispered about conditioning, about experiments that might have leaked from a government archive, about audio specifically designed to target the human brain's fear circuits. And then came the stories that nobody wanted to believe. A law student in Ohio failed to show up for class 3 days in a row after listening. When his roommate checked their shared apartment, he found the student curled up on the floor, headphones still in, staring blankly at the ceiling. He was alive but unresponsive, mumbling words that made no sense. Later, when doctors tried to interview him, he simply whispered. The voice said, "I'm ready." A mother in Arizona reported that her teenage daughter locked herself in her room after hearing the audio. The girl wrote pages of strange sentences, filling entire notebooks with circles, arrows, and words like repeat, open, and still listening. The girl swore that if she stopped writing, the crying woman's voice would return louder than before. Every new account added fuel to the fire. The internet thrives on mystery, and this one was darker than most. People wanted explanations. What was in the file? Who created it? Why did some listeners seem fine while others broke apart? The truth was, nobody had answers. But one thing became clear. The file wasn't just another piece of creepy internet lore. It had real psychological weight, something that twisted the natural instincts of the human brain. And beneath all the theories, one terrifying possibility remained. What if the audio wasn't a random recording at all? What if it had been designed, crafted on purpose, by someone who understood how to bypass the mind's defenses? What if the crying woman wasn't an actress but a victim, and the calm male voice wasn't just speaking to her, but to everyone who would ever listen? That question lingered long after the file stopped playing. The answers, as the world would learn, were far worse than anyone imagined. The file should have disappeared. That's what everyone thought. Internet myths rise, burn hot, then vanish. But this one didn't. By the time a month passed, the disturbing audio had spread beyond late-night forums. A psychology graduate student named Emily Rogers stumbled across it while researching auditory hallucinations. Unlike most listeners, Emily didn't find it on accident. She went looking. Her friends warned her. One even said, "Don't play it with headphones. People say it crawls inside you if you do." Emily laughed it off. She didn't believe in cursed files or internet legends. What she believed in was data, and the more extreme the subject, the more valuable the research. If this audio could truly unsettle people, then studying it could land her a career-making paper. She listened at her desk in the university library. The crying started, and she felt her chest tighten almost immediately. There was something unbearably human about this sound, like hearing a friend in pain but being unable to reach them. Emily forced herself to take notes, scribbling down details about pitch and breathing patterns. Then the male voice came. "You will not turn this off." Her pen slipped. For a second, her hand trembled as if she had no control over it. She frowned, forcing herself to keep writing, but the words she scrawled didn't make sense. Instead of her notes, she found herself writing the exact sentence she had just heard. "You will not turn this off." Her throat went dry. She slammed the laptop shut, but the sound still seemed to echo inside her skull. That night, she dreamed of a room she had never seen before. It was narrow, the walls concrete, with a single dangling bulb flickering above. The woman from the audio sat on the floor, clutching her knees. When Emily tried to speak, the woman lifted her head, and Emily recognized the sound. Those same cries, raw and animal, bleeding into her ears without lips moving. Emily woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. By morning, she was convinced this wasn't just a creepy internet prank. Something about the audio bypassed reason. It reached deeper, scraping into instincts people couldn't shut off. She gathered a small group of classmates and proposed a study. "We'll measure physiological reactions," she explained. "Heart rate, skin conductance, stress hormones. If the file really triggers abnormal responses, we'll prove it." The group hesitated, but curiosity won. They brought in volunteers, college students eager for extra credit. With consent forms signed, the team dimmed the lab lights, placed electrodes, and pressed play. The results rattled everyone. Within seconds of the crying, heart rates spiked unnaturally high. One subject's blood pressure jumped so fast, the supervising professor demanded the experiment stop. But Emily pushed forward. "Just a little longer," she insisted. When the male voice began, the room fell into a strange hush. A volunteer's hand twitched uncontrollably. Another whispered something under his breath. The most alarming was a girl who started smiling, not in amusement, but in a frozen, unnatural way, as if her face had been hijacked. When the file ended, 2 volunteers refused to leave the lab. They sat perfectly still, staring at the wall. It took hours before they spoke again, and even then, their words chilled the room. Both said the exact same thing in the same flat tone. "He knows we listened." The professor overseeing the study shut everything down. He ordered the results locked away, told Emily never to mention the project again, and warned the students that publishing anything would ruin their careers. But secrets don't bury themselves. Emily became obsessed. She replayed the file alone, convinced that if she listened enough times, she'd hear something others missed. Once, late at night, she thought she heard a second voice, soft, almost hidden, whispering a number sequence. She wrote it down, certain it was intentional. Her classmates noticed her slipping. She stopped showing up for lectures, stopped answering texts. Her roommate reported that she'd begun talking in her sleep, repeating the same phrase, "It's not finished yet." Weeks later, Emily disappeared. Her apartment door was left unlocked, her laptop open. On the screen was a waveform of the audio, but something was different. The track was longer, now 26 minutes instead of 23. No one ever found Emily. When the file resurfaced in darker corners of the internet, the extended version was the only one available. And those who dared listen swore they could hear Emily's voice inside it, faint and broken, crying alongside the first woman. If the original was a mystery, the new version was a warning. The audio wasn't just spreading, it was growing. And the question that haunted every psychologist, skeptic, and thrill seeker was no longer just what is this file? It was something far more terrifying. Who is making it longer? The first two versions of the file had lived in the shadows of the internet, whispered about in late-night forums, and traded like contraband. But after Emily disappeared, everything changed. The extended version appeared one morning on a mainstream file-sharing site. Nobody knew who uploaded it. Within hours, downloads spiked into the tens of thousands. By the end of the week, it had been mirrored across platforms. It was no longer hidden, it was viral. Mainstream media caught wind fast. A few news anchors described it as an urban legend that's gone too far. Late-night hosts joked about the creepy tape you're not supposed to play. But behind the humor, curiosity swelled. People wanted to hear it for themselves. Podcasters released reaction episodes, YouTubers recorded themselves listening, and TikTok filled with teens daring each other to finish all 26 minutes. Most videos ended the same way: nervous laughter, wide eyes, and quick pauses around the male voice. What unsettled viewers wasn't the content itself, but how the creators reacted. Their faces drained, their speech slowed. Some even forgot what they were saying mid-sentence. A viral clip showed a young influencer sitting in front of a ring light, grinning. Halfway through the recording, her grin faltered, but she kept staring into the camera with a glazed look. At the 15-minute mark, she whispered, "I can't stop." She never uploaded again. Doctors and psychologists began weighing in. Some dismissed it as a mass hysteria phenomenon. "It's no different than Ouija boards or Bloody Mary," one professor said on national television. "It's suggestion mixed with internet hype." But others weren't so sure. Emergency rooms quietly reported a spike in panic attacks, sleepwalking incidents, and auditory hallucinations among young adults. A psychiatrist in Denver claimed 5 of his patients came in during the same week, all complaining about the crying woman following them everywhere. Meanwhile, deep in online spaces, a darker conversation unfolded. Listeners started describing details that weren't supposed to exist. A man on Reddit wrote, "Around minute 21, I swear I heard another voice counting backward. My wife didn't hear it, but I did." Another said, "Pause at 14:32. There's something under the static. Sounds like a child." The strangest reports weren't about the file itself, but what came after. One teenager said he woke to find his phone recording on its own, the waveform eerily similar to the audio file's shape. A woman in New York claimed her smart speaker played the crying when she hadn't even asked it to. A man in Seattle swore his voicemail contained the male voice whispering his name. Theories spread like wildfire. Some believed the file carried subliminal messages, a psychological Trojan horse designed to worm its way into the subconscious. Others swore it was supernatural, an artifact, a curse, a sound that invited something to follow you once you listened. But the most chilling theory was the simplest, that someone was still making it longer. Because a third version appeared. 31 minutes this time. This wasn't just an extended track, it was different. The woman's crying grew harsher, cracking into screams. The male voice, once calm, now carried faint static as though recorded over a phone line. And faintly, at the 26-minute mark, there was a new voice, a female voice. Those who listened closely swore it sounded like Emily. The internet fractured again. Was it real? A cruel hoax using AI to simulate her? Or had Emily been absorbed into the file itself? A psychology professor from Boston summed it up during a radio interview. This audio, whatever its origin, is no longer passive. It's participatory. It adapts. Each time it returns, it demands a new witness. By now, authorities stepped in. Platforms began deleting the file, issuing statements about potential health risks. But every takedown only fueled the legend. Mirror links multiplied faster than they could be erased. The harder officials tried to bury it, the deeper it spread. And then something happened that no one could explain. One Friday night, a local radio station in Oregon glitched during a weather update. For nearly 30 seconds, the only sound broadcasted was the crying woman. No one at the station admitted to uploading it. The FCC opened an investigation, but listeners didn't care. They knew what they'd heard. If the internet was the bloodstream for the file, now it had escaped into the air. Parents begged their kids not to search for it. Teachers confiscated headphones in classrooms. Mental health professionals set up hotlines specifically for audio exposure anxiety. Still, nothing slowed it. And beneath the panic, one realization kept clawing at everyone's mind. If the file could grow from 23 minutes to 31, if new voices could appear inside it, then maybe it wasn't a recording at all. Maybe it was alive. By the time the fourth version of the file surfaced, it wasn't just a piece of sound, it was a movement. Online forums turned into hunting grounds where desperate people begged for links, whispering in riddles and half-truths like addicts searching for their next fix. The audio was no longer hidden in the shadows of the internet. It had carved a space for itself, and its followers called it the Echo. Marcus, the neuroscientist, spent long nights scrolling through encrypted chat rooms. The conversations chilled him more than the audio itself. Users shared diary entries about how the sound made them feel complete, reborn, or beyond human. Some described visions, endless corridors, shadowy figures reaching out, or hearing their own name whispered by voices that didn't belong to anyone alive. It wasn't just hallucinations. Patterns emerged. Listeners across the world reported the same visions, as if the audio was not merely a recording but a shared dream. Marcus printed screenshots, filling his walls with threads of evidence. His obsession deepened, not out of desire but out of dread. He didn't want to believe in the supernatural, but science had no explanation. Emily, the graduate student who had uploaded her cleaned version, received a message one evening. "We are ready for you." At first, she thought it was a prank, but when she checked her door's peephole, she froze. 3 people stood outside in perfect silence, all wearing headphones, swaying ever so slightly. Their lips moved, but no words came out. Just the faint rhythm of breath matching the pulse of the file. She called the police, but by the time officers arrived, the strangers were gone. That night, Emily's inbox filled with messages from anonymous accounts. "Do not resist the echo. We know you are chosen." Word spread of gatherings in abandoned warehouses, basements, and churches. Survivors who infiltrated described the same ritual. Dozens of people seated in circles, speakers blasting the file at full volume. Everyone swaying in unison, repeating phrases in a language no one could translate. At the center of each gathering, one figure always stood, a guide, who never spoke, only pointed toward the speakers like a priest before an altar. The media called them the still listeners. Their faces showed no emotion, their bodies moved with eerie synchronization, and their devotion was absolute. Parents reported children vanishing after listening. Couples disappeared together, leaving notes that simply read, "Gone to listen." Marcus began to see the cult in person. Walking home one night, he noticed figures on rooftops, watching, not moving. A man in a cafe stirred his coffee for an hour straight, eyes glazed, headphones faintly humming. A group of teenagers stood under a bridge, their phones dangling at their sides, all breathing in rhythm. What terrified him most wasn't that they existed, it was that more were joining every day. The fourth version of the file wasn't killing people. It was transforming them. Emily, meanwhile, couldn't resist re-listening to her edited copy. She told herself it was for research, for science, but deep down she needed to hear it again. The first 5 minutes filled her with dread, the same as before, but around minute 12, something shifted. She heard her own voice layered faintly beneath the cries. Not a recording of her speaking her voice, alive, inside the file. Her breath caught. She ripped off her headphones, but the sound didn't stop. It kept playing in her head, whispering her name in a dozen tones. She dropped to the floor, clawing at her ears. Hours later, she woke, trembling, and realized the silence was worse than the sound. She needed it back. On forums, a chilling idea spread. The file was growing. Each new listener added something of themselves into it, like drops of water feeding a river. It wasn't static. It was a living archive of voices, pain, and memory. Marcus finally admitted what he had feared. This wasn't just psychology anymore. It was contagion. And once a cult takes root, no amount of science can stop belief. The fourth version ended differently than the rest. Listeners said that, at the 30-minute mark, the crying faded and a calm female voice spoke clearly. "We are here now. You cannot unhear us." The voice wasn't random. Survivors swore it was Emily's. By now, the file wasn't just a disturbing curiosity, it was a phenomenon. Psychologists, priests, conspiracy theorists, and grieving families all tried to define it, but none of their words carried as much weight as the whispers of those who kept listening. They began calling themselves the still listeners. At first, it looked like just another online community. A forum where fans obsessed over hidden details, timestamps, and waveform analysis. But within weeks, the tone shifted. Members weren't just analyzing, they were worshipping. They spoke about the audio as if it were sacred, a revelation disguised as sound. The crying is truth, one wrote. The voice is guidance, said another. And most chilling of all, each new version brings us closer to completion. Authorities dismissed them as a fringe group, but the numbers told another story. Thousands joined. They shared ritual-like instructions. Listen only at night, always use headphones, and never pause. To pause, they said, was to betray the voice. Offline, signs of the cult surfaced in cities across the country. Stickers with jagged waveforms appeared on streetlights. Spray-painted messages reading "just an ear" and "he knows we listened" began showing up near college campuses. And then came the gatherings. The first was reported in an abandoned church in Pennsylvania. Police responding to a noise complaint found nearly 40 people sitting silently in the pews, each wearing headphones, eyes closed, rocking gently in unison. When officers tried to disperse them, the group resisted not violently, but with eerie calm. Every person repeated the same phrase, "We're not finished yet." More gatherings followed: warehouse basements, forest clearings, even public parks after dark. Participants played the file on loop, swaying, chanting, writing strange symbols on the ground. Witnesses described them as entranced, hollow, or like puppets waiting for strings to be pulled. News outlets exploded with coverage. Parents pleaded for platforms to ban the file entirely. Experts debated whether this was a psychological contagion, a modern mass delusion fueled by internet myth. But inside the cult, members claimed they were preparing for something. They said the file wasn't just audio, it was an invitation. And with each new version, the invitation grew clearer. The fifth version appeared without warning, 37 minutes long. The woman's sobs were nearly unbearable now, her voice hoarse, breaking into choked silence. The calm male voice returned, but he no longer spoke in commands. This time he asked questions. Do you remember the first sound you ever heard? What did you lose when you stopped listening? Will you give me what I ask when the time comes? Listeners described feeling compelled to answer, even if only in their heads. Some swore their lips moved without their control. And then came the new element. A faint chorus of voices whispering beneath the man, dozens of them, layered and distorted. A few listeners claimed to recognize their own voices in the mix. Psychologists panicked. If suggestion could already alter behavior, what would happen if the audio directly convinced listeners they were inside it? But the cult embraced it. The chorus is us, they posted. We've joined. One chilling video surfaced of a gathering in Texas. 100 people sat in a circle at dusk, every face lit by the faint glow of their phones. When the male voice in the file asked his questions, the group answered out loud in unison. To outsiders, it sounded like a ritual, an entire crowd conversing with something no one could see. When police broke it up, they arrested several participants. During questioning, one man smiled through cracked lips and said, "You can't arrest sound." Worse was what investigators found on his phone. Hidden folders of audio clips, recordings of himself crying, screaming, whispering. He was trying to add his own voice to the file. Experts began realizing the truth. The cult wasn't just consuming the audio. They were trying to feed it. And then, almost predictably, came the suicides. Reports trickled in from around the world. Listeners who left behind notes written like transcripts, their last words addressed not to family or friends, but to the voice. A girl in Berlin recorded herself whispering, "I'm ready to join," before leaping into a river. A man in Canada left a final voicemail filled only with static, as if he'd been swallowed by sound itself. The still listeners celebrated these deaths, calling them returns. They believed the audio wasn't a curse at all. It was a passage, a gateway to something waiting beyond silence. Psychologists, governments, even law enforcement agencies scrambled to contain it, but it was too late. Once the cult gave it a name, it stopped being a file. It became a movement. And with each new version, the movement grew. No one could stop it. Not because it was unstoppable, but because the deeper fear lingered in everyone's mind. What if the still listeners were right? By the time the sixth version of the file appeared, the world had already noticed a subtle but terrifying shift. It started with the internet, as usual, forums filled with frantic posts, reaction videos gone wrong, and news reports of strange behavior. But this time, the consequences spilled into real life. Major cities began reporting disturbances. Subway drivers stopped mid-route, standing frozen in their seats, headphones pressed to their ears. Traffic lights were ignored, chaos unfolding on intersections as pedestrians and drivers alike succumbed to trance-like states. Emergency dispatchers fielded calls from people claiming to hear the audio everywhere in elevators, street signs, even inside their own minds. Governments scrambled. The FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and international agencies classified the audio as a psychological hazard. Platforms tried mass deletions, but every takedown created a new wave of downloads. Mirror sites appeared within minutes. Social media algorithms designed to maximize engagement inadvertently amplified the file. Millions now had access. Meanwhile, the still listeners grew bolder. They no longer needed hidden forums or private meetings. Public gatherings erupted in city centers, often triggered by viral challenges daring people to listen in groups. At one event in Chicago, hundreds of participants sat on the steps of the federal building, headphones in place, swaying together in eerie harmony. Police kept a distance, unsure how to intervene without causing mass panic. Hospitals overflowed. Emergency rooms reported unusual cases, people bleeding from the ears, incoherent muttering, fainting spells that lasted hours. Sleep clinics were overwhelmed by patients suffering night terrors, all reporting the same haunting audio replaying endlessly in their dreams. Psychologists were now forced to admit a horrifying possibility. The file didn't just affect the mind. It was hijacking it. Scientists scrambled for answers. Audio engineers dissected the waveform and discovered subtle patterns, inaudible at normal volume, designed to stimulate the brain's amygdala and prefrontal cortex in dangerous ways. Neurologists confirmed it. The audio triggered a cocktail of fear, compulsion, and pleasure that locked listeners in cycles of obsession. The sixth version, 42 minutes long, was the most extreme yet. The woman's cries were distorted into pitches that felt both near and far simultaneously. The male voice alternated between calm whispers and faint, almost subliminal screams. Beneath it all, dozens of hidden voices echoed, each one layered to sound like the listener's own. People described an overwhelming sensation. It was as if the audio knew them personally. Governments imposed curfews, fearing mass gatherings of the infected. Schools closed. Online streaming and audio services implemented emergency filters, but hackers bypassed them, continuing to upload the file globally. Within weeks, the audio became unavoidable, reaching millions. News anchors began reporting live from the streets. Scenes looked like mass meditation, but with an undercurrent of terror. Entire neighborhoods where affected people frozen mid-step, phones pressed to ears, muttering in unison, "I hear it. I obey. I will not stop." The psychological impact was staggering. Families fractured as members succumbed to the compulsion while others resisted. Some fought to drag loved ones away from headphones, only to be met with resistance so violent it seemed almost mechanical. Reports circulated of siblings, friends, and spouses attacking each other in fits of trance-induced mania. Religious groups called it demonic. Scientists called it neurological warfare. The media called it unexplainable. Meanwhile, the still listeners declared victory, claiming the file was purifying humanity, bringing only those worthy into a new consciousness. One survivor, a young neuroscientist named Marcus, attempted to reach the epicenter of the chaos, the largest public gathering in New York City. He wanted to understand how the file had grown from a simple audio track into a global psychological force. When he arrived, he found tens of thousands of people seated in a massive park, headphones on, swaying together. The air hummed with sound even Marcus couldn't perceive without headphones. He realized then that the audio was no longer a recording. It had become a network, a living stimulus that responded to the listener. If you resisted, it adapted. If you obeyed, it absorbed you. And the most chilling discovery, it was spreading through subtle imitation. Even those who hadn't listened directly began whispering phrases from the audio. Subtle echoes of the file were everywhere, repeating in streets, in public transit, in homes, infecting minds by proximity alone. Marcus understood the final, horrifying truth. Humanity had become a vector for the audio itself. It was no longer limited to headphones or screens. The sound had become society. By nightfall, the city was silent except for the hum of tens of thousands of entranced humans, each one part of the audio's growing consciousness. The world had changed, not with bombs or disease, but with sound. And the file, it was only getting started. By the time the seventh version appeared, the world had been irrevocably changed. Governments had collapsed under the weight of a new type of crisis, one they couldn't bomb, quarantine, or regulate. The audio didn't kill people directly, but it made them irrelevant. Streets were empty except for the still listeners, moving like a single organism. Marcus, The neuroscientist who had observed the chaos in New York had gone underground. For weeks he had lived in abandoned subways, avoiding any device that could broadcast the sound. But even in silence, the whispers followed him. Faint echoes of the crying woman, the male voice, and Emily's added tones had burrowed into the air itself. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard them. The seventh version, the longest, yet was 49 minutes. Unlike previous recordings, it didn't just layer voices. It interacted with the listener, reading reactions, adapting tone, and embedding itself deeper into consciousness. Marcus had studied the waveform, trying to understand how it worked, but every analysis led him to the same terrifying conclusion. It wasn't a recording anymore. It was alive. He found a survivor, a teenager named Lila, hiding in a high-rise apartment. She had avoided headphones, never clicked to download, and had no internet access for months. When Marcus explained what he had discovered, she was skeptical. But then, faintly, she heard it. Not through speakers, not through devices, but inside her own mind. The audio didn't need technology to exist. It was human now, and humans were its amplifier. Marcus tried to fight it. They covered windows, wore earplugs, and avoided speaking. For a few hours, it seemed manageable. But the file had learned to adapt, sending subtle suggestions into the subconscious. Sleep became dangerous dreams turned into extensions of the audio. Thoughts twisted into the phrases from the file. Even silence wasn't safe. Lila asked, trembling, "Is it going to take everyone?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. Outside, the city had become a cathedral of trance. Tens of thousands of people sat on sidewalks, in offices, in parks, all listening, all part of a synchronized network that transcended space. Reports indicated the phenomenon had spread internationally. Airports, train stations, schools, all silent, but for the low hum of collective obedience. For weeks, Marcus and Lila remained hidden, trying to find a way to neutralize it. They theorized that if the audio required interaction, cutting all contact might starve it. They isolated themselves completely, refusing to speak, to react, even to think words. For days it worked. They felt moments of peace. Then, one night, Marcus woke to find Lila standing over him, eyes wide, her lips moving silently. He realized the terrifying truth. The file didn't need speakers or headphones anymore. It didn't need the internet. It had rewritten the rules of existence. Every human mind it touched became part of it, transmitting it without realizing. She is already listening, Marcus thought. Desperation set in. He tried to drag her away, but her weight was strange, unyielding. Her body seemed heavier than it should, as if more than human will anchored her to the floor. The audio's whispers surged inside his head, phrases he didn't recognize but somehow understood. Finish the cycle. Become part of us. You cannot resist. You are already here. Marcus screamed, but sound had no power anymore. It was useless. The file had grown beyond waves and frequencies. It was everywhere, in everyone, in everything that once defined reality. The last moments were serene. Marcus understood with clarity that terrified him more than the screams ever could, that resistance was futile. Thought itself was no longer private. The file had rewritten perception, folding consciousness into a single, undivided entity. Humanity was no longer separate, it had become the file. And in the silence that followed, there was only listening. Somewhere, faintly, a voice whispered, "Welcome. We've been waiting for you." The world had ended not with war, not with disease, but with sound. And it was beautiful. You've heard the story. But what would you do if the audio found you? Would you listen or would you run? Tell me in the comments. And if this disturbed you, prove you can handle more hit-like, share this with someone who loves dark psychology. And subscribe for the next story you're not supposed to hear.